Snow Day by Priscilla Cummings. Blood, Digger called out. Brady, JT, come quick. My friend and I looked at each other, our mouths dropped, and we took off through the snow-covered field. It wasn't easy running in our boots. We must have looked like two turkey buzzards the way we lifted our feet and down out of the snow and flapped our arms to get some momentum going. Just under a foot of white flakes had fallen overnight, but it was enough to cancel school, a snow day. We three called each other as soon as we were up. We had to wait for JT to get some chores done on the chicken farm where he lives. But then my mom made blueberry pancakes, so that gave me time to eat. I even got to thinking that Digger would like some of those pancakes too. Over at his house, the kids all just got up and ate whatever was there. Our time, one time it was goldfish crackers, almost never pancakes or eggs, so I knew he'd love an invite, and he did. Stop right there, Mom ordered, holding our empty plates as we opened the door to go. Digger, where are your gloves? He lifted his shoulders and let them drop. I don't know, he said. I hadn't noticed he wasn't wearing gloves, but half the time we were outside in winter, Digger didn't have a hat or gloves on. He never complained, though. I've always thought that Digger was pretty tough. We were only in sixth grade, and already he talked about how he was going to be a Marine someday. Here, my mom said. She set down the plates and fetched a pair of leather gloves I'd just gotten for Christmas. I'd hoped that Digger didn't lose them. Brady, Mom said when we were halfway out the door, I know this is a snow day and you boys want to have some fun, but it's also your opportunity to get that science report done. So save part of your afternoon, okay? I nodded, but in no way was I going to write about dolphins on a snow day. Finally, we were out of there. Closing the door quickly became because my yellow lab Tilly wanted to come too. And this was one time when we had to leave her home. Come on, I shouted to Digger, not wanting to suffer Tilly's whining. We plunged into the snow and raced each other across our yard onto the street and finally up the long, curvy driveway, already plowed, to Digger's grandfather's farm. It was maybe our favorite place on the face of this earth. In warm weather, we made tree forts in the woods, rode the hay baler, slept in the barn with bats, and sucked on raw, sour rhubarb from the garden. Winters, with a fresh snow, we liked to go tracking, guessing which animals had come through, trying to figure out where they came from and where they went. If you wanted to track animals, you had to do it first thing while the tracks were fresh and before the sun started melting everything. Right off behind the barn, I saw what looked like fox prints, evenly spaced because of the way the animal trotted. I'd been seeing a fox lately, a big, bushy-tailed red one, and I was eager to know where it slept overnight. JT wanted to find the fox too, so we started following its tracks. Digger picked up on 2 deer and went in the other direction until we heard him holler, "Blood!" When we met up, we saw right off the bright red spotches on white snow. Think it got shot? I asked. Better not have, Digger exclaimed. This land's posted. No one's supposed to hunt here, not ever. Even though Digger's grandfather didn't have milking cows on the farm anymore, he still had a few heifers. No way were hunters allowed on his property. Still, it doesn't stop some people, I told him. JT snorted, agreeing with me. If it did get shot, maybe we can help it. We can find it and help, Digger said, surprising me a little because I didn't normally think of him as soft on animals. So we set off following the blood trail. Weird, but a feeling of dread, a kind of queasiness in the pit of my stomach came over me. I've often wondered since then, can a person sense something bad is about to happen? The deer tracks took us all the way across the pasture and down a hill to the cow pond. It's a pretty big pond, and what happened is that the wind blew some of the snow off the pond before it piled up, so there were patches of bare ice. Where there was snow, however, we saw an interesting crisscross of tracks. Maybe a lot of animals had already come seeking a drink. "Look," I exclaimed to JT, "the fox tracks again." I followed them, walking fast and sliding some on the bare ice while JT and Digger pursued the wounded deer. Suddenly, about halfway across the pond, I heard a heavy crack. It was so loud it echoed in the hollow. I stopped immediately. I knew it was the ice, but there wasn't time to change course. The next crack tore through the frozen water like a giant zipper, the ice giving way beneath my feet. I sunk in fast and was sucked up to my armpits in cold, icy water. "Guys, help!" I shouted. It was all I could get out before I was gasping and struggling just to keep my head above the frigid water. My boots, my lined jeans, my parka, they all weighed a ton. I slapped at the water and chunks of ice with my heavy, mittened hands, but already I felt my limbs going numb. Seemed like a long time, but I know now it was a mere seconds before my friends rushed towards me. "We're here," Digger shouted. "Hold on," JT called, but the ice opened up in front of them and they had to backtrack fast. Digger circled swiftly around the growing hole in the ice. "Brady, can you get over to the edge here?" I tried to look at him. I can't," I mumbled, because an amazing sleepiness was setting in and I could barely speak. "I'll get a branch," JT shouted to Digger. "No time," Digger yelled back to him. "Come here and grab my feet." I didn't get what they were doing then. I was already fading out, I think. In one swift movement, Digger dove over the ice and stretched out his bare hands towards me. JT kneeled behind, holding his feet. "Grab hold," Digger yelled at me. Weakly, I flailed in the water. The cold was paralyzing my arms and hands. "Do it now," Digger hollered at the top of his lungs. I hated it when he yelled at me. I forced my arms and hands with everything I had and felt Digger's hands grab my own. Next thing I knew, he was hauling me out of that icy pond. Digger peeled off my soaking wet parka, while JT pushed my arms into his dry ones. My feet felt like a ton of cold water. Wet cement had been plastered to them, but those two guys walked me across the pond halfway, lifting me up the hill, across the field, and all the way back to Digger's grandfather's house. It was kind of a blur after that. Digger's grandpa drew a warm bath, and I was stripped down and put in the water while phone calls were made. Next thing I knew, my mom and dad were there, wrapping me in towels and warm blankets and then dry clothes. It was late, sitting in Digger's grandfather's living room, all of us sipping on hot chocolate, shaking our heads and being thankful, even laughing some, that I noticed the chip in Digger's front tooth. An hour later, JT and I went home with Digger. We wanted to see him get praised for being the hero, I guess. But that's not what happened. At Digger's house, his truck driver dad was still asleep, and Digger's brother and sister had just spilled grape juice on the kitchen table, which had Digger's mom peeved. I knew Digger wasn't going to make a big deal out of what we'd done, so in a loud voice, I told his mom right there, "You won't believe this, but Digger just saved my life. Pulled me out of the frozen cow pond." "It was amazing," JT chimed in, "but maybe we didn't look like we just escaped death, not with our clean, dry clothes and all." Digger's mom paused in her cleanup and looked up. "That's so?" "Absolutely," I reassured her. JT nodded like his head was going to fall off. The corners of her mouth lifted, but she didn't have time to say anything more because just then Digger's dad came into the kitchen rubbing his eyes and asked what all the commotion was about. Didn't we know he needed his sleep? Digger just saved my life, I repeated. Yeah? Digger's father squinted and scratched his bald head. Yeah, it was pretty incredible, Digger admitted. He smiled big, the way he deserved to smile. And just like that, the expression on Digger's dad's face changed. What the heck? He demanded. He walked over to Digger and roughly lifted his son's chin. You chip your front tooth? Digger felt it with his index fingers. Must have, he said, although I'm pretty sure he already knew. Huh, I guess 'cause I threw myself on the ice. You knucklehead, his father held up his hand like what he was going to do with Digger and went to pour himself a cup of coffee. I ain't paying to have that fixed. You do something stupid like that, you pay for it. The three of us stood there, silent and stunned. His dad took a sip of coffee and threw us a look. What? But nobody spoke. The air seemed to have gone out of the room. Go on, his father said with a scowl. You beat it, boys. Digger, go to your room. JT and I got out of there fast. We knew better than to stick around when Digger's dad got going. JT went on home, and so did I. I told my parents what happened, and then went into the living room where I picked up the remote and sprawled on the couch. My dad had an errand to run, and my mom went back to cooking a special meal for me, including my all-time favorite dessert, which is apple pie. After a while, I turned off the TV because I couldn't get into it. Instead, I went to my room to work on the dolphin report. I was looking through my notes, some I took from Wikipedia, when I reread how dolphins establish such strong special bonds that they will stay with other injured or ill dolphins, even helping them to breathe by bringing them to the surface if needed. At first, it made me daydream about the wounded deer we'd been following, like what happened to it, and was another deer helping it? And then I got to thinking about Digger, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I knew I had to do something. Both Mom and Dad thought my idea was a good one. As soon as that apple pie was done, we put it in a box, got in the car, and drove over to Digger's house. Digger's mom let us in, and there was Digger's dad sitting in his big chair watching a wrestling show on TV. We brought Digger a pie, I told them. Digger's little sister and brother, Leanne and Hank, ran up to peer in the box. Hank's eyes grew large. It says his name, Leanne exclaimed, in frosting. I smiled because she didn't know how to read yet. No, I told her gently. It says hero. Your big brother saved my life today, and I want to thank him. I'll go get him, Leanne offered, and no one stopped her as she rushed off to fetch Digger. That's when my dad said to Mr. Griswold, Look, we'd like to pay to have that front tooth fixed. Mr. Griswold finally got up from his chair, and Mrs. Griswold turned off the TV. Y'all don't need to do that, he mumbled. Really, we'd like to, my mom said. It's the least we can do. It's my fault Digger chipped his tooth, I added. Yeah, well, we'll see, said Digger's dad. He scratched his bald head and looked over at the pie. Mom handed the box to Mrs. Griswold, and I was giving her a carton of vanilla ice cream in a plastic bag when Digger came in, leaned back, but pulled with both hands by Leanne and Hank. I smiled at him. How you doing? Okay, he said with a slight shrug, uncertain what was happening. They brung you a pie, Leanne said excitedly. Can we eat it now? We didn't stay long, but I knew Mr. Griswold was eager to get a fork in that pie. I could only hope we'd made things a little better, if only for a while. Don't slip on the ice, Mom said as we left. I glanced at her because it seemed like a funny thing to say to me after what had happened, and because just then I was thinking about a pod of dolphins jumping through the tropical water. Brady, Digger called as we picked our way down the front steps. When I turned, he was handing me my gloves. I forgot to give these back. I waved him off. Keep 'em, I said. Hey, and thanks again for saving my life. Digger dropped his hand and